Good morning, sir. Having a quickie before you start?
Hi, morning, Robin.
Yeah.
How are you?
All right, and you?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm joining you from a local pub.
It doesn't look like the pub behind you, you know. Oh, yeah, that does.
Yeah, because the same guests can have afternoon tea.
Yeah, so I thought might as well lead by example. So come and see how things are going with the new regulations.
Yeah.
So yeah, so far so good. Quite pleasantly pleased. They seem to be a better job than the schools are doing.
Yeah, the schools are in and out, aren't they?
Yeah.
And the thing is, they don't seem to be actually. They've got these bubbles, but they're like, I mean, a secondary school, the bubble's about 200 kids, or what? One, wandering around kids. I mean, it's not really a bubble, is it?
No, well, I think different schools have a different approach. And I know being a school governor and having to go through the whole signing off for risk assessments and everything else, it's certainly interesting, to say the least, the actual difference there is between the schools and their approach to the whole COVID situation. So,
yeah. Morning, Peter. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hear you fine. Yeah.
Yeah, we're good. Really busy.
Yeah.
Well, I say really busy. Busy with the resources that we've got to cope with. Busy with the resources we've got.
Are you getting around at the moment?
But we're turning people away for dining at weekends and stuff because we can't keep up with it. So occupancy through the week would be sitting maybe between 28 and 34. Then at weekends we're up to 55, 60.
Which is not bad considering the situation and the time of year.
So as you know, at this time, cash is king.
Yeah.
So when you're doing 20 grand a week in sales and everybody's paying on departure, then you've got cash in the bank.
Yeah. That's it. Have you got capacity to do anything outside to get more dining covers?
Yeah, we've got 20, 25, 30 seats outside, but like for today, it's piss and rain. So
yeah.
The outside space doesn't lend itself to being covered like marquee or anything. It just doesn't. So we didn't even try. And you're heading into the winter. What we are doing is using some of our private dining rooms as overspill for dining at weekends to get the covers in.
Yeah.
And now just deciding what Christmas is going to look like.
Yes, it's an interesting thought for everybody, isn't it?
It depends if you believe the stories and rumours about second national lockdowns and stuff.
So, yeah, I'll cover some of that this morning. Kind of try and give you the insight as to what's likely to be coming down the line.
I've been told from 4 sources within companies like Coca-Cola, Amazon, Tesco's, that the government have got a backstop date of the 14th of October, and if the virus is still out of control by then, it's a 3-week lockdown, national lockdown, the 14th of October.
I think the challenge is, if you look at the current curve and where we're tracking, if you go back to the end of last week, the curve is basically tracking where we were at on the 3rd of April.
Yeah.
Almost same exponential curve, same increase in cases. I think what the challenge is we're seeing at the moment is we're not seeing the number of deaths this time around. Now, there is a bit of an argument floating around that says, is it as bad as the first time because we haven't got the deaths? Or is it due to the fact that we're just ramping up the testing?
Well, the more people you test, the more you find.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think with some of the new tests coming out on the market now, where you can get a diagnosis within about 10 minutes, the challenge is that the current testing that's available to the public is very, very depends on who's doing the test and how good they are at doing the swabs. So a lot of, certainly from personal experience, having had to go through the testing process, if you don't do the swabs just right, then you will get a negative reading because you're not getting to where you need to actually pick up.
I also had a table in for lunch last week that the lady had worked on the Oxford vaccine programme.
Yeah.
And her friends still are on it, and they're apparently aiming for December, January. Clinically approved trials, vaccine ready to go.
Well, the UAE have actually got a live vaccine which they're rolling out to their frontline workers from this week.
Really?
Which has been trialled successfully, been proven to work, and the question really is if the UAE can do it in a matter of months, why are we dragging our heels, kicking our heels, and saying it's not going to be until December, January time?
And I said to that woman, you know, how long does it take to make 100 million doses of this stuff? And they're making it already in the hope that it gets a go ahead. It's all been stockpiled.
Yeah.
Question is how many people are they testing? I mean, the Russians said they got one, but they hadn't actually tested it on hardly anybody yet. So
Exactly.
they're out there. It's just they've not been tested.
Yeah, and I think when you get to human trials and vaccine testing, it's always this catch-22 situation as to how far do you go, how many different people do you test it on, but also what group of the population do you test it on. And I think that's $1 million question. Now, obviously, the UAE have done it right. They seem relatively confident talking to people out there. But I think ultimately proof will be in the pudding as to once they roll out the vaccine, does it actually work in an uncontrolled setting?
Will that be their new oil to the rest of the world?
Well, if the Americans have got anything to go by, they'll be straight in there with we don't care what it costs. Give us the vaccine.
Interesting.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hello. If I've got a PDF.
Hello.
Chris.
Yeah.
Morning, Robin.
Hi there.
Put myself on mute a sec.
William.
Morning.
Hi there, Craig. Hi, Paul.
Good.
Indranil, Lauren.
Morning.
Morning.
Amanda.
Morning.
You're here.
Robin, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
That's all right. My Zoom's been playing up on with the audio over recent days. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning, Neil.
Morning, Robin.
Barry. Is Barry there?
Good morning, everybody. How are we all doing?
Good, thanks, Barry.
Morning, Barry.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all.
So, slowly ranking up. We'll see. I've got 66 people booked on today, supposedly.
Oh, good.
Yeah. We'll see how many we get to. It's always around about 60%. 60% of that figure of everyone who's actually come online. So we'll see if we can break a record today or not.
66. That's excellent.
Yeah, we usually get about 50 to 60 booked on, and it turns out to be about 40 odd. It's people suddenly come up with last minute meetings, and as I always say, business comes first.
Well, this is business.
Well, yeah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Robin. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. You?
Excellent. Very well, thank you.
Looking very sunny out there.
Oh, it's lush. Been gorgeous, hasn't it, the last couple of days?
Okay.
No, not everywhere.
Oh,
Not in
Maybe
Scotland.
not everywhere.
Sorry, Barry.
oh,
If you could
in-
send a
in
little bit
Aberdeen,
of your
it's,
sunshine up towards the Glasgow area, I'd be
yeah.
great.
Well, it's up here now. We've got light rain. Can't see much more than 200 yards.
Quite a good day for you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Give it a little bit more longer to get the last people in. And then we'll get straight in with some news from Luke. Here we go. Here they all come. Morning, David.
Morning, everybody. How are you all?
Morning, DC. How are you doing?
How's it going?
Morning. Morning, Steve.
Morning.
Here we go.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning, everyone.
Morning. Well, we'll give it a start. It's looking a bit low still, but plenty to talk about today. And as we were just discussing with Luke, he's going to give us a bit of an update on all the COVID regulations and everything that have just come out and where the situation is at the moment. So I'll hand it straight over to Luke. Do you want me to share the presentation on my screen, Luke? Oops. Just 1 minute. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. Where can I mute? Because somebody's. That's it. Are you there, Luke?
Yeah, I'm here. I will see if I can share it.
There we go.
So, can everybody see my screen? Hopefully everybody can. So good morning, everybody. My name's Luke Martin. I run Athena Group International. We're a consultancy that spent pretty much for the last 3 or 4 months advising a number of organisations around COVID and what they need to have in place. Obviously, things have changed recently over the last couple of weeks, so this is just designed just to give you a very brief update. If you have questions, then if we can leave them till the end, if that's okay, Robin, and then we'll pick up the questions afterwards.
Yep.
So I think, so to start off, we all know where COVID is going. I think if you look at all the data, we are currently, with the rise in the number of cases, tracking where we were at the start of phase 1 of the pandemic. And I think the challenge is, yes, we've got an increase of cases, but are we seeing an increase in deaths? Not yet. But then experience tells us from phase 1 that it can be a period of weeks or months before we start to see the deaths recorded. So the government has put into place some new guidance which applies to, as it says on the slides, all hospitality and tourism and leisure venues. So this is whether you are a pub, bar, restaurant, hotel, conference centre. So this is now kind of the latest update. There are, as always, regional variances, which I'll cover towards the end of the presentation. So it's slightly different from Northern Ireland, Scotland, and across the border into Wales. So I think the first area where it's affected, and this at the moment applies to England, and I'll come on to changes for the devolved administrations, is as of Monday, they've cut the number of people that are allowed to meet down to groups of no more than 6. and some specifics that apply to the hospitality sector are you can still host larger numbers of people, but if you have a large party turn up, they need to be split up onto separate tables. They can be next to each other, but they need to be grouped within their household bubbles. And the onus is on the actual venue managers, venue owners to make sure this happens. So from previous experience over the last couple of days, a lot of venues are actually asking people on the door now, are you all from the same household? If not, then they are actually advising and sometimes having to forcibly split them across a number of tables. Now, the key exemption to the rule is if you have an individual household or a support bubble, they can still sit together. So it's about how do you manage this at the front door as guests are coming into the venue. However, the slight complication is if you have a wedding reception or a funeral wake or a educational or training event, these can still take place within your venues up to 30 people, but obviously with the socially distanced seating where possible. There is a bit of a debate around should you be asking your guests to wear masks inside the venue unless they are actually eating and drinking. Again, from experience from what I've seen over the last week, different venues are taking a different approach, and I think it depends on your own individual risk assessment as to what approach you decide to take. Some venues are actually asking guests to wear masks when they're queuing up to order from the bar. Some venues are saying you've got to wear them as you're walking to your table, but once you sit down at the table, you don't have to wear them. So it goes back to my previous presentation to this group of look at your risk assessment and decide what's appropriate. Test and trace. So test and trace from the 18th of September is now mandatory for all venues. And they will be taking enforcement action against venues that are seen not to be following the principles of track and trace. The guidance is now that you should have an official NHS poster as guests enter your venue with a QR code. And if you haven't already, you can actually register for the official NHS QR code, which will take the data and it removes some of the liability on you as a venue of having to hold the data yourself because it's then captured centrally. It also applies to conferences. So if you are a venue that's having business meetings, conferences, or you're looking at running events, or you're currently doing wedding receptions and the like, then again, you have to have this process in place. Where it differs is if you have, as I know some venues are, if you're doing a mixture of sit-in and takeaway, the only contact information you need to be collecting is for customers that are actually staying and dining in the property. So for events 30, 20 Christian, in terms of the banquet format, I think again it's what your risk assessment says. The preference at the moment is that you don't do self-service banquets, but wherever possible it should be table service plated food rather than an all-you-can-eat buffet. Certainly if you look at a lot of the larger hotel chains, they've removed their self-service breakfast buffets and it's now table service or plated straight out the kitchen. Now, alongside the track and trace, so they've also changed the information slightly that you have to record. And for the first time, we're going to see that it's mandatory now to record specific information about staff that are working on site. So looking at more specific staff details, So names, you also now need to have a contact phone number, and this includes any agency staff that you're bringing into the business. The onus is on you as the employer, if you're using agency staff, to hold that list of contact details, dates and times that staff are in work, and then customers and visitors, pretty much the standard, but they're asking now for departure times. So if guests are coming, sitting down for a meal, they want to know what time the guest arrives, but also what time they actually leave the venue. And the other key change is the bottom one, that if you have customers that only interact with specific members of staff, so more for the high-end venues where you may have a butler service provided to the rooms, and even down to housekeeping, if you have specific housekeepers going into specific rooms, they're expecting you to record those specific individual interactions now, as a way of to further strengthen the track and trace. Now, I appreciate that does increase the amount of information you need to be recording, how you record it, and obviously the concerns around GDPR, so in what format do you record it, and not just asking people to sign in a register as they walk through the door. It needs to be individual forms that are then either put into a post box or held securely, not like one particular venue where there was a huge stack of forms with people's individual details at each of the bar tills visible on the bar. And then enforcement. So I just want to touch on enforcement now. So prior to the 14th and the 18th, the enforcement action was you'd get a visit from the police, you'd get words of advisement. They are now stepping up the enforcement action. So if there is a report that a venue is not complying, the government is now instructing that environmental health officers visit the premises, and they will have the power to fine and, in serious cases, close venues down with no notice if they feel the breach is significant enough. There's also an introduction of the new, what they're calling COVID-19 secure marshals. So these will be individuals employed by local authorities to essentially police the nighttime environment where you have hotels, where you have venues in city centres or on retail parks. And again, they will have the authority to go in and talk to venue owners if they feel there is a problem, and potentially report up to the chain for a formal inspection to take place. Now, there are areas obviously already in local lockdown. What we're likely to see is powers to restrict opening hours of leisure and tourist and hospitality venues, alongside a restriction on what you can and can't do. So again, it's just to be aware that as we go further along, things may change, and just make sure you keep up to date with the latest information for your area. Now, there are, as I said, there are some regional variations. So the difference over border into Wales is there is a mandatory information retention period for 21 days. However, if you get a request on day 20, you will then be expected to extend that retention period for a further period as defined by the police or NHS Wales, or the local authority. So again, it's just about thinking about how you store that data and amending your other processes. The other slight change with over the border in Wales is they're saying if a customer starts to display symptoms, then you should advise them to leave your premises straight away and return home if well enough to do so. Now, that's not come out explicitly in the guidance for England, and it's not come out explicitly in the guidance for Scotland, but actually it's common sense. So I'd urge all of you to think about how you monitor your customers, and if you think they are starting to display symptoms, what approach you would take. Scotland, the slight variation there is that children under 12 are exempt from the maximum number of people that can meet. So you can have 6 adults and any number of children, as long as they only come from 2 households, indoors and outdoors. Again, Scotland now, it's mandated that you have to wear a face covering when you're seated within a pub, restaurant or hospitality venue. And the other guidance is that individuals should avoid visiting multiple premises on the same day outside of routine meal times. So especially if you're looking at the younger generation, they tend to go for a few drinks here, a few drinks there, a few drinks there. Again, it's thinking about how you approach this issue on the door. What questions do you ask, bearing in mind people may have been drinking. The last thing you want to do is antagonize them. But it's now kind of, if you like, a recommended step that Scottish establishments should be taking. The other change is obviously they're now pushing through the signage. Now in Scotland, you can either operate under a 1 metre social distancing policy or a 2 metre. And one of the things they're pushing now is that businesses need to have clear signage on the front of the establishment before guests walk in to advise on the individual restrictions. And the other thing is individual households where you have got these larger groups going, that they've got to be segregated across different tables. So if you have a large family gathering, it's how do you manage splitting up individual household groups across a number of tables within the venue and stop them pulling all the tables together and just sitting as one big group, and making sure that social distancing is maintained. And then Northern Ireland, latest information, and this may change, the limit is now 15 people who can meet each other both indoors and outdoors. However, it doesn't apply to the gatherings listed on the screen of a particular nature. So cultural, entertainment, recreational. So again, if you're looking at more on the event side of a business, if you have big groups, it's about how do you make sure that they stay safe within the COVID secure guidance, and you can manage the number of people turning up to the event. So there's been a couple of questions, I think, in the chat. So Roy, the QR code poster is the recommended approach. If you, as a company, decide you want to use something different, by all means you can do. I think the reason they're trying to push everybody towards the NHS one is the details are then not held by the individual business, they're held on the individual's phone, and they get fed directly into the track and trace system that will be used in the event of an outbreak. In terms of, just to cover off before I finish, so what we're likely to see as we move into kind of the latter part of this year, early part of next year, there are obviously vaccine trials underway. The Oxford University vaccine is now back on track. However, there are other vaccines being made available across the world. So the UAE is I think the first country to be actually rolling out a vaccine to their frontline workers, following obviously human trials and testing. In terms of the UK, I think there is mention, as I know a couple of you on here have heard, of a hard line in the sand of the middle of October for cases to either drop or further restrictions to be put into place, including they're now not ruling out another national lockdown for a period of time if the cases don't start to decrease. So part of your planning should be essentially looking at your business, looking at what your options would be should you end up in another national level lockdown. With the national level lockdown will be closure of non-essential venues, but also the key question that still remains unanswered is there are currently no plans for a reintroduction of the furlough scheme. Quite simply put, the government spent all its money in round one. There is nothing left in the piggy bank. So it'll be interesting to see how it's funded. Another interesting one for those of you that may have deferred tax payments, VAT payments, HMRC has been instructed to aggressively recoup any late payments of tax, corporation tax, VAT, and letters are going out to individuals right across industry, from small, medium enterprise, sole traders, right up to big corporations, saying your tax is due, please contact us to arrange to pay it. This is to essentially offset the amount of money that's been spent and try and recoup some of the losses from phase one. And then as we move more towards Christmas, there's going to be a review around, obviously we hit Christmas party season for a lot of hotels, what the arrangements are going to be. If cases aren't decreasing, then I suspect the limits that are currently in place will be reviewed and will stay, or if cases are still going up, they'll be tightened up even more significantly. So again, if your business relies on a lot of event work in the run up to Christmas and over the Christmas period, just think about other options. How else are you going to be able to manage to stay in business, stay functioning over the festive period? That's it from me. So if anybody's got any questions, I'll open the floor up.
Thank Luke. I just noticed there was one question from Christian about for events 30 to 40, if they'd interpret they can eat afterwards in a banqueting format.
Yeah, that goes back to the, yes, you can have events of up to 30, no more than 30. In terms of eating, the advice is not banquet style. So,
yeah, but can they eat? But can they? I know it's plated, but can we serve as a restaurant format? Because, or do you see that they can have a meeting, but not necessarily the lunch or the dinner aspect of it?
Oh no, they can have the lunch in the restaurant. Yeah, absolutely. So if they're on a delegate day rate, then yes, they can have their meeting. They can then go sit in the restaurant and have lunch, and it can be served restaurant style. That's absolutely fine.
And would they have to? Do you interpret they'd have to sit on tables of two? Because it'd be two separate households.
And I have asked this question on behalf of a couple of other people I've been talking to, and the advice goes back. It's down to the individual venue's risk assessment as to what they feel appropriate. I know from previous experience what a lot of venues are doing is, if it's a day delegate rate, is they're serving the food restaurant style, but actually in the room.
Okay.
So essentially they use the same room they have for the meeting to have their lunch, and then it essentially removes any challenges of how do you seat them in a restaurant with other guests that you may have in the venue at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
So it sounds like cabaret style meetings for everybody. So you can then sit and put their food in front of them and not have to worry about the whole issue, really.
Pretty much that seems to be the safest approach, is cabaret style meetings, where you can kind of, if you've got a big enough venue, you can space them out around the tables, and then they're all in one place in one room, and you then haven't got to worry about them interacting with other guests. And I think just to touch on the guest displaying symptoms, I think it's also at point of check-in as well, just being a little bit more aware with your reception staff that if you have got guests that appear to feel unwell, that your reception staff feel empowered to challenge the guests and say, should you actually be checking in? Are you well enough? Now, on the testing front, obviously testing capacity is challenged at the moment. Sorry, I'm going on a bit. And it's just about also for your own staff, rethinking around what you do if they start to fall ill. A lot of businesses now are saying, if you display any form of symptoms, and I appreciate we're getting into cold and flu season, but any form of symptoms, you have to stay off until you get a COVID test and you can prove to us that it's negative. So that's just to think about your own workforce and how you manage them.
Okay, thank you very much, Luke. Anybody else have any other questions on that? Or shall we move on swiftly? Okay, so next in line is David Collins, who will give us a presentation on where he sees booking at the moment, where he sees the revenue situation.
So good morning, everybody. Thanks for that, Luke. Thanks for the introduction. You can see that, can you, everybody?
Yep.
Yep, good. Okay, and you can hear me okay as well, can you? Good. Okay. Just to push on, I've just a few slides to share with you on some booking trends and a few things that are happening within the industry and the wider travel industry, which might be of interest. Just before I do, just picking up a couple of points there that Luke made. Here in Ireland, our temporary wage scheme, which was pretty much the subsidy that kept hotels going, a lot of other businesses going over the last 6 months, was changed to the wage subsidy scheme as of the 1st of September, which means effectively that the subsidy itself reduces, that hotels and businesses need to wait 6 weeks before a refund from the government. And also that you need a tax compliance certificate in order to qualify for the scheme. So it's obviously a indicating a tightening up of what was essentially a very valuable scheme going into the winter. Though I suspect that we are going to be faced with a significant number of redundancies. Hotels and smaller businesses are stretched now in terms of cash flow, obviously, not having had really a spring or much of a summer season. In the hotel industry here in Ireland, for example, there's anticipation that there'll be some of the region of about 100,000 job losses unless there's evasive action taken on the part of the government. I think we're heading into some pretty dark times, but not to dwell too much on that. Our own government today is announcing with a bit of a fanfare a 5-step plan in terms of precautions that we'll be taking and deploying to manage COVID for going forward for the foreseeable. Already the commentary is that it's insanely complicated, intricate, nuanced. The government seems to be grabbing defeat from the jaws of victory, it seems, and complicating something that to date has been, I think, very well managed, certainly here in Ireland. If I can just add one comment to that, I did choke on my cornflakes this morning when I heard that Priti Patel was suggesting that people would shock their neighbours if they saw parties of greater than 6 people having a get together. And why I was disappointed to hear that is that because I think the way in which COVID is being managed most effectively is by way of the social contract that people have amongst themselves with the government and the various authorities, etc., in terms of adopting a responsible position in terms of their own hygiene and those around them, etc. And unfortunately, what is happening now is that that's been undermined. I think that people will feel as if it's almost moving towards a Stasi type regime, which is not good, and I think will be counterproductive. We are seeing a certain amount of it here in Ireland, but again, it's a very, very subtle balance to be maintained. But anyway, that's just a personal view on management. Just quickly, I don't have very many slides, so it won't be a death by PowerPoint scenario, hopefully for you. This was a slide from a presentation back in June. And the important point to make here is that based on sentiment research, we anticipated that there was approximately 40% latent demand within the short breaks family holidays market, lesser the family holidays market, more the short breaks market, which was encouraging going into, obviously, this is in June, going into the autumn winter period. I should add that we work with 130 hotels throughout Ireland and the UK. So we also partner with a number of service providers, including in this case Avio, who provided that information to us. So it was quite legitimate. The important point, though, is that now I'm pleased to say that we are seeing that demand coming through. If you, for example, do a very simple search on Google Trends, looking at hotel breaks, this is for Ireland. This is the period from the 1st of January through to yesterday. In fact, you'll see obviously the big dip in the middle there, which is obviously the 4 or 5 months of COVID, starting to resurge then as hotels reopened. And that's continuing right the way into September and onwards towards October. And I'll back that up with some statistics we're seeing ourselves. As you can see, it's the opposite of the sombrero that we're all being presented with in terms of the COVID infections. The red column, or the red graph, by the way, indicates self-catering demand. But it does, I think, point out, and that's for Ireland. This is, by the way, is for the United Kingdom. A similar sort of trend there. Self-catering bubbling along the bottom. But that actually, I think, masks really the importance of self-catering within the overall travel industry. You know, anecdotally, I think a lot of people have preferred self-catering over hotel breaks, but it does point to a significant resurgence in demand for hotel breaks. Just drilling down a bit, looking at hotels in Ireland versus Hotel Scotland, Hotel Wales, you'll see some level of resurgence there at different levels depending on where you are. And again, that's just a snapshot. I haven't gone through all the different regions, etc. But it does point to a common trend, and that is a resurgence from where we were. The caveat I would put on that is that it's just pointing to levels that were similar to perhaps January, February, and would, you know, you'd expect it to be significantly different, for example, if we did have a summer season. But encouragingly, it does suggest very buoyant demand for autumn breaks. I would, again, not to be too much of a party pooper, I have to say that you know, the demand is finite insofar as it is primarily comprised of domestic demand without any international inbound business, whether it's into the UK or into Ireland. Just to stand back a bit and look at the industry itself, a couple of major things happened last week. Booking.com, for example, mentioned that it was embarking upon a restructuring program, which is going to see approximately 25% of its workforce being culled, which approximately is 4,000 people worldwide. Similar situation, for example, Expedia, major restructuring, 3,000 jobs to go. Both of these are obviously key OTAs, and you know, I think it's fair to say that Booking.com would account for probably 70–80% of any hotel's OTA distribution mix. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. And then, you know, whereas, you know, some amongst us wouldn't be too sorry to see that happening to Booking.com, nevertheless, they are an essential, as indeed are Expedia, they're an essential part of our overall distribution ecosystem, if you like. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see how that impacts on hotels' ability to get their product into the marketplace. I'll come back to that in a second. But interestingly, just on Expedia, something I noted is that they're dropping Home Away, which is a self-catering shared accommodation brand, and moving it over to VRBO, which again is a much weaker proposition, but that's their decision. But also moving Hotels.com to a different platform, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Interesting though that, and this is the important point, is that Expedia are pulling back from a lot of meta search. And I think that's important because hotels will be keenly aware of the fact that trying to get first page rankings has become insanely expensive over the course of the last 5 years as we compete against the likes of Booking.com and Expedia, which has been driving up the cost of sale for bookings clearly. So there's going to be a bit more space in the marketplace in terms of targeting paid search. So again, interesting to see how that pans out. And then finally, a little bit close to home, but nevertheless relevant to the UK as well, the hotel group Dalata. They lost an incredible 71 million in the first half of 2020. Their occupancies for July and August, 30% and 40% respectively. Revenue fell by 60%. And yet they're still pressing ahead with their expansion plans. They've just signed 2 new leases in Manchester and Birmingham. I suppose there is the saying that you should never waste a good crisis. Airbnb likewise are pressing ahead with their own IPO. They clearly see an opportunity to take advantage of the landscape, which is clearly depressed. Property values, for example, are of a certain value significantly less than they were perhaps 12 months ago. So some people see an opportunity within the marketplace, and that's entirely to be expected. Just looking at some statistics produced by STR for July to 2020 versus 2019. I won't go through all of them there, but you can see yourselves. This, by the way, this presentation I'll send to Robin. You can circulate it afterwards. Occupancy fallen by 67%, ADR down 36%, and RevPAR 79%. Compared to Ireland, similar fall in occupancy. Slightly less of a fall in ADR, 24.6%, and RevPAR, massive 71.8% fall year on year. Just sharing with you some confidential statistics. I can't tell you where I got these, but I can tell you they're an official source. Looking at a sample of 323 properties, just under 34,000 bedrooms, taken the 7th of September. So this is current information based on business booked. Looking at, the performance of the 26 counties here in Ireland versus the 26 plus Dublin, you can see the difference that it makes if you exclude Dublin. And Dublin is currently, and much like London, I believe, is on its knees with the lack of event business, the lack of group business, the lack of international business. Whereas conversely, the borders, the regions, particularly coastal counties, are seeing a major increase in demand relative to what they would have perhaps experienced previously. So Dublin's loss is the region's gain. And I think we're seeing similar trends in the UK as well. That begins to peter out as you go deeper into the autumn. Again, that's to be expected. Demand is very late to pick up, and I'll come to that in a second. It's interesting to see, though, how the 5-star properties are faring against 4- and 3-star. Look at September, 37% occupancy versus 34% and 30% for 3-star. There is still a lot of cash about, by the way, and people are very keen to enjoy the best experience they possibly can. There's still a lot of traffic about. People are, again, as I said earlier, clearly deciding to take the break that they could have taken earlier in the year during September and into October, which again is very encouraging. Looking at our own stats, for example, drilling down a little bit, and I'm pleased to share these with you. This is across our 130 hotels. Looking at our online revenues, for August, obviously, we saw a significant increase year on year in terms of average booking value. Less so ADR, but still going in the right direction. But if you go forward to September and October, again, this reflects the level of demand that we're currently seeing for September and October, both in Ireland and also in the UK. In terms of our booked revenue, for example, over the phones, what I've just shown you there on screen, in fact, is our online revenue performance. Looking at our phones revenue, for example, up 12% in bookings, 13% in revenue, and average booking value is no change versus August. And that's interesting because you normally expect August to have a much higher average booking value. And that goes back to my point that people are they still have a propensity to spend. Obviously, they have expectations, but nevertheless, there is less perhaps resistance to lower prices as you'd expect perhaps in September and October. Going forward, I presented this back in June. This is an SDR forecast for the next, well, in terms of our potential for recovery. Again, there's no change to this. Short-term time frame, 6 to 12 months. The global financial crash is GFC, by the way, so the recovery will be significantly slower than was experienced in terms of the GFC. I won't drill down too much into that because it's depressing enough as it is. But just finally then, in terms of what hotels can do, perhaps my own thoughts, I think it's very important that you realign your yielding to allow for late pickup. People are literally booking today to arrive tonight. With Booking.com and Expedia coming under pressure, I think it's important that people relook at their channel mix, the channels you're distributing through, you're doing direct, etc. I do think there's an opportunity perhaps to focus on your direct channel, which is your own website, for example, insofar as people are happier to connect now with you than perhaps previously. You don't have that noise out there in terms of the OTAs perhaps as much as previously, so there's a clear opportunity for hotels to target direct traffic, which is much lower cost of sale traditionally. By all means, encourage your repeat and referral. People are a lot more open to receiving offers. They're looking for deals, and they will refer if they feel that they've gotten value. It is important to manage your website content, keep it current. Google are still penalizing hotels for having out-of-date content or content that doesn't change often enough. Do watch your PPC, because a lot of people tire kicking at the moment, which can impact on your paid search, the cost of your paid search. I personally would avoid bucket shops like Groupon, etc., because they have a huge cost of sale for very little revenue, and there is perhaps a temptation to generate a lot of cash quickly, but that can damage your brand. And customers perhaps don't spend as much when they're on the premises as you would like them to do. Again, do manage your cost of sale, which is the cost of generating your business. With meta search perhaps being less noisy than previously, we might see a reduction there over time, but it's perhaps too soon to say, but it's one to watch. Do implement a flexible cancellation policy. We had a 16% cancellation rate in August. We had a 3% cancellation rate in July. People are shopping around, they are making multiple bookings, but at the same time, because of the fluid nature of this COVID situation, it's important that you do maintain a very pragmatic view on cancellations and enabling people perhaps to defer bookings. By all means, track your competitive set. As always, that's good practice. And I would suggest twice weekly analysis of your pickup, drop-off pacing in terms of your revenue. It's vitally important that you take a very granular approach to managing your rooms revenue in particular. That drives everything else in your business. It's exceptionally fickle at the moment, and it's vitally important that you're all over any trending within your revenue. And then finally, cocooning. The temptation, I think, for a lot of hotels is perhaps look at standing down the business, effectively cocooning the business perhaps through to March, certainly spring 2021. There are merits in that. We're, for example, seeing quite a lot of inquiries for people from hotels to engage us on 6-month short-term contracts for outsourcing our services into their businesses. That is an opportunity for hotels perhaps to, hunker down for the winter. The one point I'd make, just on a practical point, going back to your web content, you do need to maintain your web content as current, because otherwise you will suffer penalties, for example, from Google in terms of ranking. So there are a lot of practical considerations to bear in mind there. That's it, Robin.
Okay. Yep. Anybody have any questions for David? No. Okay.
Hi, Robin.
Yes.
David, just picking up on the cocooning comments at the end. So if you have a small to medium-sized hotel that is struggling at the moment, so are you suggesting that there is benefit in cocooning, or are you saying kind of be careful and essentially have a think before you go down that route?
Yeah, I think it's important to really look at the options, Luke, because it's easier. We found out it's easier to close a hotel than to reopen a hotel. We found that over, for example, the 3 or 4 months that hotels were closed, re-engaging customers and staff is hugely challenging. It's as if you're opening the hotel again for the first time. Notwithstanding, the massive amounts in terms of extra precautions, protocols, hygiene, obligations, etc., it was a significant challenge to us. So that's on the one side. On the other side, though, if you bear in mind the fact that occupancies could be in the region of, I don't know, 20, 30%, possibly significantly less. You still got to heat the hotel, your lighting, you got all your hygiene or your regulatory obligations, etc. Whatever about staffing, marketing, maintaining some sort of brand presence in the marketplace. It's hugely challenging. And whereas it really depends on the hotel itself. So some hotels would traditionally be seasonal in any case. I think possibly what's going to happen there is that the season will be prolonged, perhaps for a couple of extra weeks, if not an extra couple of months, which is fine. But hotels that have never had to cocoon or never had to close due to seasonality, that's going to be a massive challenge to them, I think. And it's important that they go into it with their eyes open, because there is, you see, if you take, for example, one of our properties, Mulranny Resort above in County Mayo, that traditionally would close for probably 6 to 8 weeks of the year. Our customers are used to it closing, and they plan their holidays and their short breaks around that hotel. That's a sort of a common occurrence for that particular hotel. But a hotel perhaps that doesn't do that normally and does close can send out a lot of negative messaging to its customer base. So it's important that it's managed, the messaging, as well as obviously the operational overhead, the financial obligations, the sheer cost and profitability questions that need to be squared. It won't be one fit sort of works for everybody, but I do think that there is merit in both trying to trade through what would be a very difficult period. One of our hotels, for example, is repurposing its bedrooms as short-term offices. People need their space. They can't work from home anymore. They need dependable Wi-Fi. There are options to keep hotels open or some level of occupancy going, but for some other hotels that may not be possible. So there's a lot of hard questions coming down the line, I think, and the sooner you face up to those, the better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Any comments? Okay, so moving swiftly on again. I will give a little presentation on payroll systems. A couple of weeks back, I did a bit on cost control, and obviously one of the biggest costs in the hotel industry is your payroll. So it's very important that you keep control on your payroll at all times, especially now with the sales fluctuating so much. You really have to keep an eye on it. I know some managers who have an innate ability just to know how to control their staffing levels to get a good result at the end of a month. But there's only so many of them. And a lot of the times sort of managers are not quite so adept at it, or HODs who you entrust that job to are not quite so good at it, and they may be shooting in the wrong direction. And it's so easy just by a few wrong moves to really shoot that payroll cost up during the month. And if it's not being checked on a daily basis, you can soon get it out of control. And once it's gone, it's gone. You can't go back and relive that day with a lower staffing level. So it's quite important. But it's not just that's the reason why I'm such an enthusiast on all these payroll systems. There's so many things that you can benefit from, especially for a smaller unit that needs to have the constant control of certain areas now, but actually they can't afford the staffing to actually do it. So one of them, for example, is obviously the GDPR, and it's becoming more and more apparent these days personnel files have to be kept for 6 years. You may never look at their file for 6 years, but you've kept it, but you still have to look after it. And with a turnover of about 40%, those files start ramping up. And that storage has to be in a place that's protected. You can't just store it with sort of other general files, because if somebody finds it, opens up that data, you could be into serious problems. More than once I've walked into an admin area and found people have gone for a coffee break or something, and their personnel file drawer is open, and it only takes one situation for a legal action be taken, or for simply just something foolish like a member of staff finding out what other people are on as far as wages are concerned across your business, and then starting to cause a bit of hassle as far as that's concerned. So if a payroll system is set up well, it can help you a lot. And when I say set up well, it's important that, first of all, you make sure you analyze who should have access to all this information, and you make sure that you set up all the right controls within the system so that only they can access with their password. And the other thing I always say is, when you set up, always make sure you've got a computer with a scanner and a shredder next to it. It should be standard procedure that if it doesn't come in through an email on a PDF, which can be automatically uploaded into this software, then it should be scanned and shredded straight away, because that way you're ensuring that the only place that documentation is in your payroll system, which is password protected. And that's how it can help so much with the old security on GDPR. Also, organization. I always say good organization comes from streamlined workflows, standard procedures, well-categorized storage. I mean, perhaps talking a bit more from the finance side of things, but this is an administrative issue, isn't it, with personnel files and everything. Easy access to information for those who need that information. And these systems can not only provide all that, but they can also provide you with like regular alerts on when people have to go through their training again, even when they have their birthday. So you can, from a motivational point of view, you can highlight that and say, hi, happy birthday, John, happy birthday, Tom, and all that. So it's good for organization. Standard documents is always a good one. Offer letters, contracts, disciplinary letters. The ability to have a standard template which will automatically be populated with that information you've put onto the system, and possibly even be able to send out directly via email, makes administration much quicker, and it also prevents errors in mistyping a contract or putting the wrong figure in. If you've set up that person on the system clearly with what their wage should be, then at least you know it's going to go into the contract correctly. So it's always good to make sure you look at those contracts. And obviously, the one that it fascinates me is the whole rota costing analysis. I mean, we've all been in hotels where they have if they're lucky, they've done the rota on Excel and they've posted it up on the wall there so that everybody can see it. And no doubt that if it doesn't get lost, fall off the wall and get lost, it will be used as their only form of actually saying who's worked what hours or who's done a different shift. And this is where payroll systems can be so much better. First of all, this information is closed in a system, so it can be up there on the wall in a private area of the business, but it's also accessible privately so that you don't risk sort of the wrong type of people seeing it. These systems can allow you to do your rotas, allow you to even know when if somebody's multi-skilling between various departments. Often they can tell you that person's already on a shift in another department, I can't use him today. And these rotas can then be obviously compared to sales and then ticked off by the general manager before the week starts. So the general manager is always able to give their two penneth to the conversation. So if it's a more junior HOD who needs training, then this is a way to help them. And those rotas can then be accessed by the employees through their mobiles, which means they've got no excuse for not knowing what their shift is today. and it just keeps it more private. And obviously the main thing is cost analysis. I always make sure with these systems that I have the actual figures going in almost daily, so that people are aware of what they've spent week to date as compared to sales, and that they have at least 2 months worth of sales moving forward, because that way HODs can plan further ahead. It may not be a precise rota for the next month, but at least they have an idea of where they're going. They can account for holidays, they can account for events and all that sort of thing, which just helps them to be more prepared for the future. So from a costing analysis point of view, it allows the HODs to react to sales fluctuations. It allows the GMs to discuss forecast staffing with their HODs, and it makes the HOD more accountable for their own little part of the business. Obviously, there must be a simple way of adding data. I remember when I first started using these systems back about 5 years ago, I was in a group that had 5 hotels, and it was a manual entry system back then. It used to spend somebody a couple of hours a day just entering sort of like forecast and actual figures into this system, just so the management could control their wages. But now, if you've got a decent forecast which has got day-to-day figures, you can create a CSV, and you can be uploading that CSV the moment you've finished your daily report, and it can be putting the actual figures in for previous days and the forecast for the next month. So every time you go adjust your forecast, it's just winding it into the system, keeping it up to date. So obviously that does mean you need to have a day-to-day forecast, which is something I've always supported. And then of course, once you've actually passed that day, I mean, there will always be corrections to times. You might get busy, you might call in somebody extra, ask them to stay a few hours extra, or you might be lucky. It might be or not unlucky. It might be unlucky. It's quiet, but you send staff home so that you can control that wage bill, and that again needs correcting on any timing, which these systems provide. If you're lucky and you connect it through to some kind of clock-in system, you're aware of what hours they actually were in the business. Normally they have a traffic light system, whereas if they're in the business for the hours that were on the rota, it's green. If there was a fluctuation, then it goes amber. So you know you need to look at that one, and if they weren't there at all, then it goes red. So these sorts of indications help the managers to quickly identify what was happening that day. And they even allow you to put in the odd disciplinary note or comment about a certain employee, which is confidential, but then can go onto their file. So if you're checking up on a certain employee, then you can see what the issues have been in recent times. And obviously, once you've updated actual times, this all feeds back into your rota system, your analysis system, so you can see what your actual spend was on previous days. Going back to the whole idea of discipline, obviously being a personnel records system, it holds all your disciplinary files as well. You don't get a warning letter going missing if you have a time on your warning letters, whereas they expire after 6 months. Then that can be recorded, so you've not got any misunderstandings. These systems allow you to have a clear idea of absence records, sickness records, whether it's you're reviewing the performance of a certain member of the team, or whether it's just simply to have a general idea of what levels of sickness you've got within your business. And of course, reporting ease. It's good to be able to go even to your mobile while you're walking around the business, just check in and see what your levels were yesterday, see what your percentage wage cost was yesterday. And you're not having people rooting around trying to put these reports together based on various different bits of information, which is always a strong task for any finance department within a hotel. I find they always provide a bit of continuity as well. If you don't have to worry about your payroll clerk being on holiday or off sick when month end comes, which is a blessing to any financial controller. You don't have to worry if that person decides to move on in life, because having contracted their payroll bureau, you have that backup to know that every month the payroll will be run. Some people have their issues. They say, well, it's not quite as good as having Dorothy. She was always perfect and all that. Yeah, I know. And but at the end of the day, having that guarantee that somebody is running your payroll to statutory standard, and the reports are going through to HMRC, and the pay slips are being issued, just gives you that peace of mind. And it's these days it's quite affordable on the system. So you say, what cost saving are there? Well, I mean, with one of these systems, one benefit I've always found is you don't get rid of your HR manager, but you can benefit from having a more professional person on a retainer rather than having to have a full-time person, which perhaps doesn't have as much experience. Because all the admin and the payroll and the HR side is almost automated, it means that you can have the liberty to say, right, well, I'll take on somebody to give me advice who's a lot more professional, a lot more advanced knowledge, but obviously I won't have to pay them as much as I'd have to pay a full-time person. With the payroll handling bureau, like I've said, it saves you having to have somebody in the office doing your payroll. I must admit, if I've had to restructure a hotel accounts department and I've had the option to get rid of somebody, I tended to keep on the payroll person and train them to do the accounts payable, because that way I always have that professional backup in the business if I feel I need it. But at the same time, you cut your staffing costs on the old admin side of it. So obviously storage costs are saved, and you can actually, if you can actually possibly repurpose storage areas for more operational needs. And obviously the big one is an improvement on your payroll cost control. And that means an improvement on your payroll cost of sales. And that has to be the main reason that these are good. Peripherally, communication is helped by these systems. I once looked at having an intranet system for a small group of hotels, and it was not in the thousands, it was actually in the tens of thousands. And yet with these systems, they allowed to have a basic system for communication, which is secure. You can track what you're sending out and also possibly track if they've received it and read it. It's good for an opening up of a hotel or when the staff are coming on board. So you can be sending out information to them before they're actually in the building even. And it's good for any regular planned updates, regular newsletters or regular training updates. And going on to that, I've found it excellent for pre-openings or new starters. There's nothing better than being able to contract somebody, put them onto your training system and have them doing all their statutory training before they even get into the building. Yes, you might have to agree to sort of pay them an extra day's wage on the front of their contract, but it means that when they hit the floor, they've already done all their statutory training, they've already been through your customer service training, they're ready to go, and they can be it could be on the job training from the word go. And it's not a case of waiting for the training manager to come by to actually do that training for them, or waiting to a slot when you've got an induction training going on. They get that training before they even start, which is valuable for me. Some of them have training modules incorporated within them, and others have links to some very good training software out there in the market as a separate thing. It helps you to keep that training record of those people and just make sure that everybody is on the same level in your team. Some of them have recruitment modules as well, which allow you to control the advertising, hit those slots that are not paying for, process the applications, process the interviews. So some of them can actually help you with that whole process of getting further people into your business. So when you're choosing a system, if you decide to go that way, first of all, make sure that it does everything you need or everything that will solve your issues. Any software that I've installed in the past, I've always been very pragmatic. It's not always a case of it doing exactly what you expect it to do. It's a case of you being able to adapt to that software to get out of it what you need to get out of it, which is it's a very important point to make with any software. Always look at several systems. I've got 3 on my radar, which I find very useful, all slightly different, but I've used in the past and I'm happy with them, and they're not expensive. So yeah, if anybody wants to ask me in private, I can tell them about those ones. Ensure you understand your business when you're setting these up. Establish cost center model. These systems can help you to control your costs, not only by looking at the wage on a daily basis, but by helping you to pull out useful KPIs. Some hotels manage to separate their public areas cleaning from their rooms cleaning, even if they're sharing staff between the 2 areas. But it means that they can evaluate what their fixed cost is for that public area cleaning compared with their variable cost for their rooms. Likewise, in bars and restaurants, it's always, if you have a bar which has to be manned permanently or semi-permanently, it's always good to split that cost off from the restaurant side of it, where you have a more variable cost, which you can manage more easily. Make sure your HODs buy into these systems. If you want your HODs to grow and become good members of your team, good businessmen within your team, these are excellent tools to help them do that. And when you're setting it up, don't be worried about asking for a little bit of help from professionals. Like I say, if you decide by saving this you can contract a HR person on a retainer, then get that person in. Make sure they set up all your contracts exactly how they need to be, so you don't have any holes. Make sure that it's all set up. Talk to a finance person to make sure that you're really programming the system well, so that you can get the maximum information out for your financial reports. And that's it, basically. I hope I haven't sounded too enthusiastic about these systems. It's just I've used them over many years, and I've always found them highly useful to actually increase not only the cost control on the business, but also the organization and the administration of the business. So yeah, I'm not sure. Let's stop sharing. There we go. Back into the forum. So anybody have any questions on that? No. Okay. Anybody have any other comments or anything else they'd like to add before we sign off today?
I have to say, Robin, is I implemented time and attendance in my hotel and restaurant about 12 years ago. And it made a remarkable difference. Is, when we took over the business, HODs basically submitted a list of everybody's hours that worked. And then without making any changes at all other than getting people to clock in and clock out, labor costs decreased by almost a percentage point. And it's simply just paying people for every minute they worked rather than, the nice HOD rounding everyone up and et cetera. And so much so that it worked is the salaried employees, the real senior ones, head chefs and HODs, even though if they're on salary, we asked them to clock in and clock out so that we could monitor their hours to comply with working time directive. And that really saved us, because we had an employee who said we were exploiting them by making them work so many hours. And we just print out the report and showed that, no, on average, you are much less than 48 hours a week. So I'm a big fan of time and attendance, and also having it flow straight into the payroll system. It was an easy win. Yeah, it's and also these days, like I say, you can pop those sales figures in on a daily basis, and you can actually see your payroll costs developing during the month. I mean, I know that it's always tricky. You get a busy day, you get a quiet day, and then you have almost too many people on. But if you know that your cost is going over for the week, and you're going to have a busy weekend, and you can possibly take the risk of just having one less waiter or a couple of hours less,
it can make all the difference to keeping that payroll cost in line for the end of the month. Anybody else have anything in general that we'd like to say?
Yeah, the bit about HODs and salaried staff clocking in and out is purely from an insurance point of view. If they, for instance, have an accident, did you know that they were on the building that day? If they're not clocking in and out, it's a protection that you need to have for that specific reason. That you can guarantee from your payroll system that they were actually on the premises when this so-called accident occurred.
Yeah, definitely. And God forbid you ever have a fire, being able to pull out a list of everybody who's on duty at the moment and know whether there's anybody trapped in that hotel is also a very valuable part of these systems. Anybody else have anything else? No. Okay. Yeah. Well, we've come to the end of another forum. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. I hope everybody's gathered something from it. And I look forward to seeing you all again in 2 weeks' time. If everybody has any queries or anything, I'm always here. Just drop me an email, and happy to chat to anybody. And hope you all have a good next few weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.